When you're looking for a perfected notice of understanding and intent and claim of right for the United Kingdom, it can be quite hard to find. There are a few sites I've seen. There are a few errors in some of them. And of course, if you go to thinkfree.ca, this all applies to Canada. Now, it's all very similar, but there are some subtle differences, and it's very important that you get the wording just right. So, by popular demand, I'm going to go through and deconstruct the Notice of Understanding and Intent and Claim of Right for the UK, line by line. Mine is shorter than the one I'm going to show you. The one I'm going to go through is sort of it covers everything. Mine does what I need it to do. Yours might need to do different things. So, with each line I'm going to put either that it's essential or optional, and you can tailor your notice. Firstly then, it will need to state in big bold letters that it is a notice of understanding and intent and claim of right. That should be a big bold heading so that everybody knows it's a notice. Perhaps enclose a short covering letter explaining that enclosed is a notice and that you want them to notice your notice, or something like that. So, line 1, this is essential. Whereas it is my understanding that the United Kingdom is a common law jurisdiction. And whereas it is my understanding that equality before the law is paramount and mandatory. So, look out for this. This refers to the Roman maxim in law on equality. And whereas it is my understanding that a statute is defined as a legislated rule of a society which has been given the force of law. And whereas it is my understanding that a society is defined as a number of people joined together by mutual consent to deliberate, determine, and act for a common goal. And whereas it is my understanding that the only form of government recognized as lawful in the United Kingdom is a representative one. And whereas it is my understanding that representation requires mutual consent. And whereas it is my understanding that in the absence of mutual consent neither representation nor governance can exist. And whereas it is my understanding that all acts are statutes restricted in scope and applicability by the Constitution and or Bill of Rights. And whereas it is my understanding that said scope and applicability is limited to members of and employees of government. And whereas it is my understanding that those who have a national insurance number are in fact employees of the UK government and thus are bound by the statutes created by the United Kingdom government. Whereas it is my understanding that it is lawful to abandon one's NI number. And whereas it is my understanding that human beings in the United Kingdom have a right to revoke or deny consent to be represented and thus governed. And whereas it is my understanding that if anyone does revoke or deny consent, they exist free of government control and statutory restraints. And whereas a free man on the land has lawfully revoked consent and does exist free of statutory restrictions, obligations, and limitations. And whereas I, John Henry Smith, am a free man on the land. All of this that I've gone through so far is absolutely essential. This lays down your understanding. It lays down the foundation of what you're going to go into with the rest of the notice, and it paves the way for you to claim the rights later on in the notice. So all of that needs to be pretty much word for word written identically to the way it's appeared on the screen. Very, very important. They will pick holes in any flaw they can find any way they can to force you to contract, or at least deceive you into contracting. So now that you've done that, these next lines are also essential to your notice. Let's have a look through these. Whereas it is my understanding that acting peacefully within community standards does not breach the peace, and whereas it is my understanding that any action for which one can apply for and receive a license must itself be a fundamentally lawful action, and whereas I am not a child. This is important. The government wants us to grow up. It doesn't want to nanny us. I mean, it does nanny us. And if you start acting like a free man and acting with responsibility, and demonstrate in your actions that you are not a child and that you're a grown-up and you don't need to be looked after anymore, then you stand a better chance at this. So okay, let's carry on. Whereas I am a peaceful human being, and whereas I am a free man on the land who operates with full responsibility, I do not see the need to ask permission to engage in lawful and peaceful activities, especially from those who claim limited liability. Now remember that all persons, which could include corporations since they're persons as well, all claim limited liability. Now you would be operating with full liability if you were to become a free man on the land. It's very important that you understand the responsibility, because you can't have that level of freedom without the same level of responsibility. Let's carry on. Whereas it is my understanding that a bylaw is defined as a rule of a corporation. Check that one out. Have a look in Black's Law or any of the law books that are used anywhere in the Commonwealth. It's very interesting to see the definitions. Whereas it is my understanding that corporations are legal fictions and require contracts in order to claim authority or control over other parties, and whereas it is my understanding that legal fictions lack a soul and cannot exert any control over those who are thus blessed, and operate with respect to that knowledge as only a fool would allow soulless fictions to dictate one's actions, and whereas it is my understanding that I have a right to use my property without having to pay for the use or enjoyment of it. And, now this is optional, it's up to you. I would suggest putting this in, but it's up to you. Whereas I claim the right to collect a pension if I have paid into it, and claim that said right is not affected if I abandon my national insurance number. And, this is now essential, this bit. Whereas it is my understanding that a summons is merely an invitation to attend and creates no obligation or dishonour if ignored. And, whereas it is my understanding that peace officers have a duty to distinguish between statute and law, and those who attempt to enforce statutes against a free man on the land are in fact breaking the law. And, whereas I have the power to refuse intercourse or interaction with peace officers who have not observed me breach the peace, and, whereas permanent estoppel by acquiescence barring any peace officer or prosecutor from bringing charges against a free man on the land under any act is created if this claim is not responded to in the stated fashion and time. We've now got through the understanding bit. So this is now your declaration. Therefore be it now known to any and all concerned and affected parties that I, John Henry Smith, a free man on the land, do hereby state clearly, specifically and unequivocally my intent to peacefully and lawfully exist free of all statutory obligations, restrictions, and maintain all rights at law to trade, exchange, or barter. So that was essential. You must word that precisely.